Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. I want to talk about the color revolution in the Catholic Church, but I want to get there by a long route. This is another link in the chain that helps explain what's happening in the world at the macro level as we close off this no good, terrible, awful year, 2020. This is my third video on this topic. A few weeks ago, I did a video called The Truth About the Great Reset, and then last week, I did one on the Build Back Better slogan. You can click the links below to watch those. All of this is tied together, but to really understand things, you have to be willing to do your own research. There comes a point where we have to realize that Walter Cronkite is dead and he's not coming back. And the next realization is that maybe you couldn't trust everything Walter told you anyway. That maybe Walter was just a newsreader serving as the avuncular face of other parties behind the scenes. The great thing about the invention of the modem is that it led to the decentralization of the news media to the absolute nth degree. Not only did the news media business expand from the big three of CBS, ABC, and NBC up to CNN, CNBC, Fox, and the whole cable news explosion in the 1980s, but now anyone with a camera and a laptop, by definition, becomes a Walter Cronkite, which is a double-edged sword. The good news being that now you have thousands of choices of commentators to follow. The bad news is you have thousands of choices of commentators to follow. The media ecology today is extremely niche-based, although the social media platforms are certainly controlled by a small number of big tech CEOs like the overlords who run Google, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. They all serve as gatekeepers and censors, just as much as Walter Cronkite and his big three bosses did back in the 1950s. It's this dynamic, this relationship between events that happen in the real world and the way they're filtered and manipulated by the media that we're talking about. And remember, the word media is Latin for in between or in the middle. It's where we get the word medial and mediator and Mediterranean and medium. It stands between us and the events that happen. Which brings me to my topic, which is color revolutions. Color revolutions are so called because groups of aggrieved peoples gather together under a banner that's typically identified by a literal color, and it has to do with the context of an election and the behavior of politicians. Whether it's the Yellow Jackets of France in 2019 or this year, or Georgia's Rose Revolution in 2003, or Ukraine's Orange Revolution in 2004, that might be the most famous one. Lebanon had a Cedar Revolution in 2005. And back in the 80s, there was the yellow ribbons and flags in the Philippines at that time. You also might remember the Purple Revolution in Iraq, and of course, the ongoing Green Revolution of the Democrat Party. There's another example of a kind of color revolution, and it has to do with the subtle manipulation of our perception of reality. In our case, political reality. And that is the designation of red states and blue states. What do I mean? Let's talk about the symbolic meaning of red versus blue. Red is the color of conflict or passion or danger. Our fire trucks are red, and we say things like, red alert. If something's hot, we call it red hot. If someone's red-faced, they're either embarrassed or extremely angry. And red is literally the color of every communist party and country in the world. So what about blue? Blue is a calming color. Waves are blue. The sky is blue, eyes are blue. Starting to sound like a poem, I know. Textbooks and school resources have tended to use blue for Republicans, in part because blue was the color of the Union in the Civil War. Blue is also typically associated with more conservative political parties in Europe and elsewhere. I mean, the Blessed Virgin Mary's color is blue. During the 1976 election cycle, this red-blue breakdown appeared on NBC television maps along traditional lines. Check out this moment from the Ronald Reagan victory coverage 4 years later in 1980.
At 8:15 Eastern Standard Time on this election night, we have projected Ronald Reagan the winner. And to add evidence to that projection, we are projecting him as the winner in more.
You notice how badly Carter got creamed by Ronald Reagan? Ouch. The media color revolution happened during the Bush-Gore election of the year 2000. That's when the flip happened. At that point, the oligarchs behind the media curtain decided that red would stand for conservative/Republican and blue would stand for liberal/Democrat. Now here's a decidedly non-excited Tom Brokaw on NBC again with the flipped color map announcing the bad news.
NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call.
From that time forward, a red state was deemed, branded, labeled a conservative state, and a blue state was branded a liberal state. Do you notice how curious that is? That's what the CIA and its main agent provocateur, Eddie Bernays, would call a psychological operation, or a psy-op. It's not a random mistake. It's a leftist ploy to co-opt the natural symbol of trustworthy conservatism for political gain. It flips it. Is there a Catholic analog to a color revolution? Well, yes, a color revolution did happen in the Catholic Church. Before, during, and after the March 13th, 2013 election of Jorge Mario Bergoglio to the papacy. The man they now call Pope Francis is by far the most political pope in history, and by all accounts is the most confusing and perhaps confused teacher of the Catholic faith in our lifetime. The political context of his election had to do with a group of liberal European cardinals who conspired to get votes for their man from Buenos Aires in 2005 upon the death of John Paul II. It didn't work. They got their ideological enemy, Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. Then their hopes soared again with the abdication of Pope Benedict on February 11th, 2013. Now this group's called the St. Gallen Mafia, nicknamed that by the late progressive Cardinal Gottfried Daniels of Belgium, named after the Swiss town in which they met. These red-hatted leftists did not hide their plans or their scheming to elect a virtually unknown left-wing Jesuit from South America. To this day, questions swirl about whether, on the one hand, the abdication of Pope Benedict was valid and complete, and on the other, whether the election of Pope Francis was canonically legal, in light of what some experts say is a violation of the rules that were officially laid down by St. John Paul II to govern future conclaves. You can read all about that in the link below. But leaving all that aside, the world's media have thrown every imaginable accolade and term of praise at one of their own, Pope Francis. In the past, in the normal course of things, popes are hated by the media and by the world because they represent Christ, who was originally par excellence hated by the world. Look at the treatment received by Pope St. John Paul II, or even Pope Benedict XVI, at the hands of a hostile mainstream media machine. Pope John Paul II was the arch-conservative, ultra-traditional, white, misogynistic, Polish male. His successor was God's Rottweiler, Der Panzer Cardinal, Joseph Ratzinger. Both leaders were treated in the media like retrograde dinosaurs, or enemies of true progress at best. Now, compare the perpetual abuse that they received at the hands of the media to the glowing paeans of praise given to the current occupant of the chair of Peter. It's astounding. Just like the non-existent, invented out of thin air office of the president-elect, if you object to things like the artistic monstrosities, such as this year's nativity scene in St. Peter's Square, you are called a paranoid conspiracy nut. Don't believe me? Look at this piece of turd. Looks like Fisher-Price meets Boba Fett meets Lost in Space. If I didn't know any better, I would say it's a deliberate insult to the Holy Family. But that's crazy, and I wouldn't want to be called a bad name. One thing's for sure, the color revolution in the Catholic Church is the color of pink. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. Don't miss anything. I'd love to hear your comments in the com box below. You might enjoy Coffin Nation. Go to coffinnation.com and find out what folks from all over the world are enjoying this very minute in the greatest culture restoring community in the world. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?